Hello, people. So you read this right. In this video, I will disprove atheism. This argument, you have never seen it before, you have never seen it anywhere. I have never seen it anywhere. I have developed it through years of reading and education and seeking, and I came to this conclusion. And this might surprise you. And so let's try to begin it, right? So, how can I disprove atheism? And I'm speaking in a logical way. I'm not here to advocate a certain belief or faith or anything. No, but just in general that atheism is wrong. It's logically wrong. And I will begin now. So usually when you hear somebody who says that I am an atheist, what does that entail? That he does not believe on God on the basis of materialistic science, meaning that they say, you see, there is nothing logical as in a materialistic scientific way that can point out to something that would resemble a God. There is nothing to the world but this materialistic existence, right? So you got all the atoms, all the physics, chemistry. So this is what the reality of existence is, right? It's all materialistic. It's all material. There is no such a thing as God or like a higher power because you cannot prove that, and therefore it does not exist. Therefore you're an atheist, right? So I will dismantle this idea because you see there is at least one thing, if you can call it one thing, that exists, that all of us know that it exists, but you cannot prove it. And if I can prove that there is such a thing exists, that you cannot prove it from a materialistic point of view, then that opens a door to theology, because if it exists once, then it can exist twice, then it can exist 10 times. What is this thing? What is the thing that all of us that know it exists and it's so basic. It's everybody knows it exists, but there is no materialistic way to prove it whatsoever. It's it's hard to sort of put into words, but it's sort of like, you see, when you see an ant that is just walking on a rock, or you see some sort of an animal, right? Now, how do you know? So some people would say that this animal have a soul, and some people would say, no, this is more like a robot. It has nothing inside. There is no sort of first view person coming outside of that animal. So we cannot prove or disprove from a materialistic point of view that this animal has a soul. But you're right here, right now, watching me, viewing me as from a first person point of view. You're seeing colors. Colors per se are just a small example of the things that cannot be measured. So I'm not speaking about all the wavelengths in the light. No, I'm speaking about if there's one person who's born blind, never seeing color, and you describe color to them, it does not matter how much words you put into that. It does not matter how much you explain color, what red means, what blue means. There is no way that he could experience the color. But it exists. It clearly exists. You can see something. We call it red. But this experience that you are feeling, which, by the way, we cannot prove that all of us are seeing the same exact colors. There is a possibility that we all see different colors, but there is a pattern. So let's say when I see the color red, I call it red. When you see the color red, you call it red, but both of us are seeing two different things. But we call it the same thing because we intersect, because there's a certain pattern that does repeat. Like this color, that when a person sees it, he knows it's called red because it's always been that way. So our brain might interpret the different wavelengths as representing different colors, and we would never be able to know. Now, the colors and your consciousness as a first person is totally unexplainable by the materialistic point of view, right? There is no reason whatsoever from a materialistic point of view to why you right now are watching me through this screen from a first from a first person point of view. Like, why couldn't you be the ant? Why couldn't you be the deer? Why couldn't you be me? Why am me and I'm not you? Like, this thing is, from a materialistic point of view, it has no place. It just is. It's outside of the realm of science, right? Why do we exist? I'm not saying why do we exist in a material sense, but why am I seeing you right now? Why are you seeing me right now? And you associate with this body, let's say. Why aren't you associating with that body? What there is, where is the logic in that? And the answer is, there is no logic to it. We don't know. We have no idea. And it's non-material. And we cannot even know what does any of this mean. It's sort of very hard to put into words even. But the argument here, if this thing exists, which has been in front of you your whole life you have been seeing colors, hearing sounds, experiencing what people call qualia. Qualia are the subjective experiences that the person is experiencing. So if the subjective experiences are there and cannot be materialistically proven, then that puts a big wrench in the idea that only material exists. Because there's clearly that, because I am seeing you and I'm hearing you and you're hearing me and you're seeing me, clearly that material is not the only thing going on. There is something more to it, and you are a proof to it. You are the proof that the world is not mere material. So from here, so that atheist person is basically wrong on a fundamental level, that the world and existence is not just material. Therefore, the possibilities are endless. So you could say, why? So is every person that? So from that point of view, if you do acknowledge that you are, which you really should be, and if you're not acknowledging that, then you might have some sort of mental problem. But if you acknowledge that you are viewing this world from a first person view, do other people also do that, or are they robots? So this thing is open to interpretation, right? The logical way to think about it, that if you are viewing this world and having this subjective experience, it would make a lot more sense to say that somebody else also does, because they sort of look like you. They might be your brother, your father, your mother, and they share your materialistic characteristics. They have the same eye, the same nose, same body, right? So why wouldn't they have a subjective experience just like how you do, as opposed to just being robots, and you're the only person who is experiencing this subjective consciousness? So, okay, so this is the second step. So you got, okay, so might be me and other people. And then you could say, okay, what about all the other animals that sort of look a little bit like us? So you have all the chimps, all the gorillas. They have some behaviors that look like our behaviors, right? How do we know that they don't have a subjective experience? It's clearly, it would be very, very different, because obviously they're not thinking like us. They're not acting exactly like us. But, it's, why, who is not to say that they do not possess that, right? As opposed to not possessing that. And so you see, you're in this slippery slope now, right? So there's a lot of subjective experiences, right? And so you can go over so many steps, but the final step is going to be that, if there's all of these subjective experiences in all of these beings, right? Who to say that there's no other subjective experiences in other bodies, in like other beings that we might not comprehend per se? Maybe this rock has a subjective experience that we don't understand. Maybe the clouds, it's because, if you do remember, this doesn't make sense whatsoever from a materialistic point of view. The fact that we are conscious, it makes no sense. So if this makes no sense, but you can still hear me, then why do you think it doesn't make sense that a cloud somehow is conscious in a way that we do not understand, right? So this is how you get to sort of the pagan religions, right? So from that point, you got to the pagan ideologies and the pagan views of how things are. Just like in Japan, they view that everything sort of has a soul of the river, soul of the cloud, soul of this, soul of that. Everything sort of has this spirit, right? And then you eventually, if you go further, you would reach, okay, if all of these things have what you call a spirit, what you call a subjective experience, right? Why wouldn't it make sense that this has to come from somewhere? I mean, some people could say no, it came out of nowhere, but that's the human mind does not accept that as the more likely thing. Because you see, there's all of these subjective. It's clearly that it's coming out of somewhere, right? So that it would be really nonsensical if you say that all of these things, I mean, you have already reached there. You have already acknowledged that they're spirits and your own subjective experience, and let's just call it a spirit. So you can see sort of like, I cannot tell you in so much details because this specific topic you cannot put into words so much, but you can see how you make that leap to be like, okay, there's a source of subjective experience. There is a source of this spiritual, immaterial existence. And then from there, you can dig deeper and you could sort of try to think about it and trying to deduct other things that you might believe in or you might think that is more likely or is more possible. So basically, this is how this goes, right? So atheists basically are wrong on a very fundamental level, and on a different talk, I want to also speak about how atheism could be a mental illness. Basically, it's a dysfunction of the mind, it's a dysfunction of the brain, it's a dysfunction of consciousness. But yeah, so anytime, if you've been an atheist, if you know somebody who is an atheist, think about this sort of an argument. If everything is just material, then how are you hearing me right now? How is that from a material point of view? How can you explain that? And I will just give you just like an answer in advance. So far, there is nothing that can explain that from a scientific point of view. I'm sorry. And so if you acknowledge that, then then the world is not just a material. And so it means that you would at least be, just to that point, you would at least be an agnostic. You cannot be a true atheist. You cannot be an atheist because you can hear me right now, because you can smell and see. Which doesn't make sense whatsoever. And so if you exist in this way, then who to say that a source of this experience does not exist? So you cannot prove or disprove that. But it is quite possible, as I just explained, that if you take steps to sort of, to deduct things, if you have a subjective experience, then other beings might, and that one thing leads to another. So it's actually a lot more likely that God exists, that the source of all subjective experience exists than it does not, because you are seeing me right now. So if you understood what I was trying to say, if this affected you, if this in any way brought something new to you, let me know in the comments. And don't budge.